On this Thanksgiving weekend, I've entitled my thoughts More Than a Passing Emotion. And we'll be looking at a favorite episode involving Jesus that's recorded in Luke's Gospel, chapter 17. I have a lengthy tradition of showing the same cartoon every year on Thanksgiving, and every year it feels more applicable. The cartoon simply features a classic Thanksgiving scene where a family is about to gather around a traditional turkey meal and someone asks, "Has it already been a year since we were thankful?" Everybody agrees that it's a good thing to be thankful, and it's not only the Bible which reveals strong support for the position that thankfulness produces positive growth in our lives. No less an authority than Harvard Medical School proclaims that gratitude is strongly and consistently associated with greater happiness. Gratitude helps people feel more positive emotions, relish good experiences, improve their health, deal with adversity, and build strong relationships. If everyone is agreed that thankfulness is a key ingredient to improving our quality of life, why do we even have to talk about it? And why is it so much easier to complain than to be thankful? For myself, instead of being thankful at this time of year, like I should be, my wife, Faith, has to put up with my constant complaining about the onset of winter. So no matter how important we think it to be, thankfulness can never be taken for granted. Last week, the children's lesson in our church service was about the healing of Naaman the leper by the Old Testament prophet Elisha. Like many accounts in the Bible, the story of Naaman's healing from leprosy is joyous on the one hand, but uncomfortable on the other. Naaman was a highly regarded military commander who apparently deserved special attention. At the same time, he happened to be an officer in the army of Aram, which was one of Israel's enemies. In fact, a young slave in his household was actually a Jewish girl who had been kidnapped on a military raid. Surprisingly, it was that Jewish slave girl who graciously suggested that Naaman seek a healing from Elisha. The part of the story to which I most relate was when Elisha the prophet sent his servant to tell the leprous Naaman to wash himself 7 times in the muddy river Jordan. Naaman was insulted that Elisha hadn't come out personally to heal him and angrily decided to ignore Elisha's instructions. We all love the part where Naaman's own servants convinced him to give Elisha's instructions a try, and he ended up experiencing the joyous excitement of being healed. We're left wondering, though, about the long-term impact to Naaman's life and what happened to the enslaved Jewish girl. Did Naaman experience a personal transformation along with his physical healing? Was the enslaved Jewish girl returned to her family? We don't know the long-term impact of Naaman's healing because that will have depended on whether he was simply excited about being free of leprosy or whether he was truly thankful. Leprosy also figured into one of Jesus' most well-known encounters. The word leprosy in the Bible covered a broad spectrum of skin conditions about which people knew very little and which caused massive fear. But perhaps even greater than the terror of the physical harm produced by leprosy was the social impact of the disease. Lepers were considered to be physically, socially, and spiritually unclean. Leprosy was as much a sign of moral failure as it was a physical disease. Luke 17, verses 11 to 19, narrates Jesus' famous interaction with 10 lepers. This is what it says. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he, that's Jesus, said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." True to proper decorum, the 10 lepers in Luke's gospel lived apart from their respective communities. Had they not been lepers, they wouldn't likely have associated with each other, because even though they hung out in a Jewish region, at least one of the group was not only a cast-out leper, but was also a culturally despised Samaritan. With reference to their ostracism, Luke highlighted the fact that they kept their proper distance even from Jesus. One thing was clear: mandated rules about social distancing were not enough to stop the lepers from seeking divine help. As happened with Naaman the leper, and as frequently happens with us, misfortune is often a motivation to seek God. Unlike another encounter with a leper recorded in Mark 1, where Jesus scandalized observers by touching an unclean leper, in this instance, Jesus maintained a separation, forcing the lepers to project their voices in order to communicate. Even though the lepers begged Jesus for mercy, he surprisingly made no promises. Instead, he simply told them to show themselves to the priests. On one level, Jesus' instruction made sense, because only a priest could release them from the curse of being unclean and readmit them back into society. On another level, the lepers must have wondered how a priest would respond if they showed up in apparent denial of their very obvious symptoms of leprosy, demanding to be declared clean. Nevertheless, they went in search of a priest, and while on their way, a dramatic change happened to them. Where there had been frightening scales and lesions, there was now smooth, supple, and healthy skin. Very quickly, a moment of stunned realization must have erupted into joyous ecstasy. They had been like death row inmates who were now pardoned and only needed to get a stamp of approval so that they could return to their neighborhoods, homes, and families, from which they had been banished for what must have felt like an eternity. They were clean. Shunning would surely be replaced with warm welcomes and heartfelt embraces. Who could blame them if they danced as they ran? There's no doubt that each of the 10 lepers were equally excited about being healed. But here's where the story demands that we take careful note. Despite that shared excitement, not all of the 10 lepers reacted the same way. The healing of the 10 lepers is a stark reminder that we should not confuse the excitement of good fortune with thankfulness. Excitement about good fortune is no guarantee of producing thankfulness. In fact, good fortune can actually make us selfish rather than thankful. Good fortune doesn't by itself break down relational barriers that have been built up. Good fortune is no guarantee of experiencing forgiveness, of either offering it or being able to receive it. People didn't always respond well to Jesus' healings. And so 9 lepers promptly forgot that it was Jesus who had facilitated their healing. We're initially surprised that out of 10 healed lepers, only 1 sought out Jesus to thank him. If we're intended to understand that only 1 in 10 people will express proper gratitude after receiving good fortune, it's a terrible percentage. Should we be surprised, or should we rather acknowledge that human nature is woefully ungrateful? All of us would like to believe that we would be like the thankful leper, but would we? The inescapable lesson is that thankfulness must be evidenced by action. To the 1 leper who returned to give thanks, Jesus said something interesting. Your faith has made you well. With those words, we sense that Jesus was referring to more than the man's leprosy, because the 9 who did not return to give thanks were equally healed from their horrible disease. I think we are meant to understand that Jesus was proclaiming that through giving thanks, the Samaritan leper was not only physically healed, but he had become a transformed person. There is something powerful about consciously expressing thanks, which changes who we are. One of the first things parents will teach their young children to say is, "Thank you." And it's often a hard lesson for children to learn. More disturbing, it's a lesson adults easily forget. When I was a child, my mother was insistent that before leaving the table after a meal, I would thank her or whomever else had prepared the meal. Offering thanks was meant to be a regular reminder to be grateful to the people in my life who were sacrificing themselves on my behalf. To my chagrin, I confess that as a married man, I have been neglectful in thanking my wife, Faith, each time she prepares a meal for me, or does my laundry, or the other countless expressions of love she gives me. If my mother were still around, I suspect she would want to remind me that she taught me better. The healing of the 10 lepers draws a connection between personal tragedy and thankfulness. Personal tragedy is often a vehicle that carries us toward God. As was true for the 10 lepers, just as it was true for Naaman, tragedy brings destruction to our lives, and we naturally seek God to save us from that destruction. While we seek God's help to keep tragedy from destroying our lives, it's thankfulness that has the power to transform our lives in positive ways. The catch is that we cannot claim to be thankful people unless we actually practice thankfulness. Like the 10 lepers, we may also feel unclean. We may also be scarred by moral failures and unwelcome attitudes that keep us at a distance from where we long to be. If that's true, we seek a way forward toward improved relationships, toward greater confidence, and toward being able to deal with adversity. Sometimes the journey toward positive transformation simply begins with heartfelt sincerity in saying, "Thank you."